Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, then maybe we should get started.
Kraken?
Kraken? Release the Kraken.
I don't get the reference. So, Jeff, you wanted to talk about open space. I am not that familiar with. It's a thing I've heard of. I've heard people talk about it. Never participated in one. Do you guys have experience with open space?
Have
We
tons
do.
of experience with open space.
You have tons of experience.
Tons. We've probably run more open spaces than you.
I guarantee you that's true.
So,
So what? Go ahead. What is it?
well, okay. So open space, very simply, is a gathering of people for an ad hoc conversation, usually with the goal of solving some burning issue that everyone there shares. And
So it's not just a hangout. It's about solving a problem.
Oh, yeah.
it's usually targeted at something.
Okay.
Now it can based because of the way it manifests, it can be used for other purposes. But the usually if you have a burning problem you've got to handle, so it proceeds with certain assumptions. Those assumptions are that you're going to get that everyone present has a stake in the outcome. That the answer is probably there in the room.
Okay.
All right. And so you follow certain rules, and those rules are very simple. It's whoever shows up are the right people. Whenever it starts is when it starts. Whenever it ends is when it ends. And whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. So these are the guiding principles of open space. So it sets a very high bar.
Did people ever say to you, "This sounds like hippy dippy bullshit"?
Sure, for about 2 minutes, and then
So it starts
amazing
working.
things happen. So there's one rule or one law that it has. It's called the law of 2 feet. Basically, you are the only person who can gauge whether or not you are getting value in what you're doing. And so as you are engaging in conversation throughout the event, you can leave that event at any time and go to another one. You can exercise your ability to move to another place. And that produces 2 types of travelers, if you will. The first one being bumblebees, and the second one being butterflies. So bumblebees will jump from conversation to conversation, cross-pollinating ideas they've heard as they go. So it's a natural way of getting people more or less aligned on the direction that things are going, or at least aware of the direction that things are
Is
going.
that a role or just a tendency that people have?
It's just a tendency.
Okay.
You're just working on the natural tendency, and you'll understand why in a sec. And then the other one are the butterflies. And the butterflies do the same thing, but they don't cross-pollinate. They just move from thing to thing, enjoying what they go. And you want that because you don't want the condition for moving to another group that you must bring value when you get there.
You can just move and listen.
You can just move and listen.
Okay.
And in fact, you could conceivably, as a participant, occupy both. You could be a butterfly sometimes, and you could be, switch to a bumblebee.
Yes.
Not a word.
Bumblebee is more of a calling.
I think of it as a vocation, but anyway, moving on.
So so you're familiar with lean coffee, right?
Yes.
Where you're building a agenda on the fly, and then you're dot voting and you're going and having conversations. So we leverage that same concept with an open space. It's just on a larger scale. So you've got dozens of people in a room, maybe hundreds of people in a room. And you state what the main purpose is, and then you start with a gathering of ideas. So usually this is traditionally has been set up where everyone gathers in a circle, around a central point. And then you say, let's now gather topics. Here's our problem. Come up with something you'd like to discuss on that subject.
So what if
And
somebody
everyone
brings
goes-
up a topic that is not relevant to the problem?
I'm sorry, say that
Well,
again.
that'll take care of itself in a second. So
what
you
if
bring up
somebody
a topic. You bring up a topic. You throw the topic. You write the topic down. You announce to the room, "This is my topic," and they all go, "Okay." And you go and you put it up on the wall, right? to
So
be,
there's no
to be
limit to people putting
considered.
topics up, but that doesn't mean we're going to talk about it.
Right. So until you give them a time limit. So for some number of minutes, people will be jumping into the circle in the middle, grabbing a marker, writing up a topic, announcing it, posting it up on the wall.
Now, for this to work, though, it does need to, those topics, those endless numbers of topics, do need to be aligned, again, to Mike's point,
That's my question.
should be
But they
aligned
don't-
around a focal point of a vexing
Should be,
problem
but
or whatever.
it doesn't matter. If
Doesn't
it's not.
have to be.
It doesn't
have
matter
to.
if it's not, because of what happens next. So what happens next is all those ideas are put up on a wall, and then you kind of look at them for grouping potential. Like 10 people wrote the same thing.
Categorize them.
So yeah, these would come together. Now, then, so we might agree that 10 of these things are the same topic, and so that is now one item. It's not 10 items.
We'll discuss that as one thing.
And you check with the people who put it up there. You say, are you okay with combining this conversation? Because maybe somebody had a unique take on it that the others didn't share. But then you go into the voting phase where everybody who's present now votes for a limited number of topics that they think are important. And, there's a science to, or an art or a science to determining how many votes everybody gets. And you're not restricted to one vote on one item. You can put multiple votes on an item to jack it up, but that cuts down on the number of things you can say are important.
But each person gets a fixed number of votes, right? Because it's dot voting. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
So basically what you're doing is you're figuring out what people are passionate about. First, somebody is passionate enough to propose a topic, and then people are voting on that based on what they think is important, what's passionate to them. So it's passion bounded by responsibility. And so
Write that down.
you dot vote all of the potential topics. You look at which ones have the most, and then you lay out a schedule. Like the ones that got the most votes, you figure out how many conversations we're going to have, how many parallel conversations we're going to have, because you don't do them one at a time. You do them in parallel.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? Which is also part of the thing, because what you're doing is you're forcing people to choose what they think is really important to talk about. And what you're doing then is you're guaranteeing that whoever shows up really are the right people to have the conversation.
Because they're informed.
Because they're
and
the
they can
ones
make
who
a choice.
care the most about having that conversation. And so if in a large gathering, you might have 4 parallel tracks. Like in a large company gathering, you might have 4 parallel tracks. And when we did this the first time I saw this was at Scrum Gathering 2007, I want to say.
Say it.
Something like that. And what and that was, the entire gathering of the place, and they probably did 9 parallel tracks. They just had conversations going all over the place. But whatever people were interested in, you decide what you'd like to talk about and where it's going to go on the schedule. So you can say, I'm the leader of this conversation because I proposed it. And by leader, you're the facilitator. So we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you get to it.
And you put the stuff up on a schedule, and then we just rerun the cycle. So basically, this conversation is going to happen at that station for 20 minutes. This one's going to be at station B. This one's going to be at station C. That's going to be at station D. And go. And everybody just scatters and goes to the conversation they want to be a part of. And then they have a fruitful conversation for as long as they do, and they take notes as they go. So the facilitator is taking the notes. They're making sure it's captured. Now, because there's the law of 2 feet, the conversation leader could leave the conversation, but they have to find somebody to take over if they do.
So
But
each individual
because they proposed
track,
it and they're very passionate about it, it's very rare for the speaker to lead the conversation.
So you can't have one of these parallelized tracks of conversation not have a facilitator that everybody, okay.
Otherwise, you'll have just a bunch of people talking and no capture of the outcome.
And Mike just hit the nail on the head here. And that's what's critical. It's not just about having the conversation, but you have to record something. So we'll use flip charts or whiteboards, usually flip charts. And he'll talk about that in a second. But you've got to record something because there have to be outcomes. Yes. Just doing open space for the sake of doing open space is fruitless. And that's not the purpose. The purpose is to come to some realization of here's a possible solution or solutions, and spark action.
So it's kind of like having a retrospective with no action items is sort of what you're avoiding.
Yeah.
So a valid outcome.
But now it multiply it times 4 times the number of sessions in a day. So you don't want to have everybody talking without outcome for 20 sessions or something.
So for each one of these parallelized conversations, a valid outcome means some sort of recommendation about an action that we can take to solve the problem that we're supposed to be all focused on.
A summary of what the key learnings were. So if you might take notes on a flip chart and you're writing down everything that's being discussed, and then somebody will call out 2-minute warning, start finalizing your thoughts, and then somebody picks like what the key. They'll either write a new one or they'll circle one and say this is the best one.
Okay.
And then there's a thing called, well, yesterday's news is when you do it multiple days, but there's a point at which you summarize the findings for the larger group. So you bring the learnings back to the larger group.
So it could be an action, could be a recommendation, could just be what we learned.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then based on that might generate new conversation topics that could go back up on the wall or potentially get redone. But you go through these multiple sessions, you have to choose which topic you think you're going to be the most effective in, or which two you want a butterfly between or bumblebee between. And it is funny when you're trying to solve a problem. If you do decide to travel the room, you'll hear the same ideas appearing around the room, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen where one group is they're really digging down deep on an idea, and they're going, this could work. And then you listen to another group and someone brings up the same idea, and that group goes, oh, that would never work.
Focus, Larry.
Yeah. And then the butterfly becomes a bumblebee and goes, yeah, well, they're digging into it over there. So, if you don't want to explore that, it's covered. Right. But they're saying that you could do this, and then you walk away.
So you really find a way to having the most efficient conversations in a scaled manner, as quickly as possible.
Yes, you're really basing things on that passion aspect of it. So when it's all said and done, you've distilled down a bunch of ideas. So there's a bunch of different ways of achieving something like this. You could do 8, 4, 2, 1, things like that.
1, 2 for all.
1, 2 for all. Yeah.
Or whatever it is. Yeah. So now we have all these ideas. And so we use this at APLN when we have large gatherings. When we get 50, 60 people showing up, you can fuel an open space. If we get too few people, maybe you can do an open space with 2 parallel subjects. I think it just helps otherwise it's just a lean coffee if it's just one conversation at a time.
It's not really a scaled conversation. It's just bounded.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've used this in business successfully. When back in 2007, when this was first introduced to me, we went to the Scrum gathering. We saw it in operation, and we were having a crisis at work at the time. And it was one of these things where the expectations of management did not meet the delivery timeline of the product. And they were imposing long hours on everyone to try to meet a deadline that was not achievable. It was just, they just figured by hammering really hard it was going to work. And they were losing morale. Everybody was just resigned to the fact that they were just going to suffer until they failed. There was no path to success mapped out. And so we came back from that gathering and we said, we need an open space. And management was once again so desperate for something. They said, what do you need? And we said, we need to get everyone out of the office. We got to get out of this environment. We have to get into a different place. We got to get them in a different physical headspace. You have to outlaw distraction. No laptops, no phones, no nothing. They're there for 2 days to focus on this. And we started out with we said, all right, so as you all know, we have a problem. We are so certain that the answer to that problem is in this room that as of right now, that mandatory overtime that you've been suffering through is canceled. This is how certain we are you're going to solve this problem. And we stated what the problem was, and everybody's and there's always this moment you do the circle and you invite everyone to start, and there's this fear that no one's going to move, right? That you're gonna get, and it happens every time I run one. Like there's this moment where you say, okay, everybody, the papers and pens are in the middle of the room. Who'd like to start, or we could just go for it? And there's this fear that no one's going to move, but they always move. Someone always jumps in there. In fact, I've seen it when they're really excited about solving the problem. Like it's like this wrestling match where everyone's just grabbing paper and they all jump into the middle. Anyway, so we ran this open space for 2 days, multiple ideas, many things. And by the end, we had 100 action items accumulated. Like they made a separate board of action items. Now, some of those action items were immediately low-hanging fruit. Let's just do this. This is stupid not to do this, and this will make a big difference. Some of them were, this can be done, but somebody's got to be the owner and focus on doing it. So those could be owned action items. And then some of them were good ideas, but there was no way that we could implement them in the time frame that remained for the project and have it even make a difference. So those got backlogged. But we went through and we implemented all those. Next day we got back to the office. We implemented those ideas. We put the ones that we were working on up on the wall as, and who owned it. And then they were reporting back and as a change management thing. Like this is where this one's going. We can start doing this one now. And we ended up turning the project around. Like at the very least, we gave people the power back to the end. They were now calling the shots. And the very first thing was nobody worked overtime the next week. It was just like, and that gave everyone a breather. But then people started doing what you would expect. They started working as needed to keep things moving, right? We're now back to a reasonable schedule because we rejiggered the whole thing and people are choosing when they're going to put extra time in because there's a need for it. And they think that they can make a difference by doing that, as opposed to being told to do it.
And that worked. So, what was the effect on the organization?
We started using them a lot. Like that actually stood. It became like I would use them when we would do, like the marketing people would come down, or call me, or product people would come down with all their requirements for an upcoming release. Like, we're going to do another big project. Here's all our requirements. And we open spaced the requirement discussions. And we would say, let's take the requirements one at a time. This is the priority of the requirements from product's perspective. Which are the ones that you guys are the most interested in talking about first? And we voted those. And it was interesting to see if people aligned with, this is the coolest one to do versus, or this is the one I would like to see us do versus was that what product thought was important to do. But that didn't affect the outcome other than it affected the order of discussion. But because we had people who their expertise was spread all over the product line, there were parallel conversations going on in that sometimes you wanted to be a part of both. So that created a need for you to law of 2 feet through the thing. Like, I want to be on both those discussions. Well, then make sure the time you're spending in each one is used effectively. Right. So it forced people to choose the thing they were most passionate about to talk about. And therefore the right people were in the room. It's this really super elegant concept.
So, and underlying all of this is the assumption or the idea that you've got the talent, you've got the knowledge, you've got the ideas, you've got the approaches already in the people running around your organization. It's just the way that they're currently organized is not liberating that stuff in the right times, the right place. You're not getting the full value out of the people you've already hired until you organize them this way.
Well, it's a way to leverage, the knowledge and the intellect of the people that can contribute. I think about appreciative inquiry. If you're familiar with that concept of appreciative inquiry, It's you know
Thank you
it's
for
really an approach to engage groups of people in I don't know, a self-determined change. And so by engaging appreciative inquiry, and this is kind of a flavor of that, you get people, to Mike's point, that are on board. They're passionate about something. Obviously, the one way that management has put forth initiatives is, it's one directional. You shall go do this, and that's fine for alignment. But if it gets too granular, don't tell them how to do their job.
Right.
Tell them this is the goal. Leverage your intellect. And how do they do that? Oh, well, gee, maybe through open space or something like that.
So I've got a few questions. Three, actually. 3 questions. Should I ask them now?
Sure.
So the first one is, there seems to be a similarity, I mentioned it before, a similarity between this and the retrospective process that we've got in Scrum. And there's a great book called, I think it's called Agile Retrospectives by Esther Derby.
Esther Derby.
Dana Larson, right. And they go into some detail about the agenda for the retrospective. They talk about gathering data and doing root cause analysis and coming up with a list of action items and then voting on the parallel conversations in the open space. Do they have sort of a sub-agenda like that? Is it necessary? Is it helpful as the facilitator to think about gathering a bunch of brainstorming ideas and then doing root cause analysis? Like, is that's probably overkill for this? You want to let those conversations sort of run their course in whatever way? Or do you think about an agenda for those parallelized tracks?
Well, if you set an agenda, you're telling people what to do.
Right.
If you're right. So
and you're not facilitating towards any sort of structure. You're just
And that's the opposite of what you're trying to go through here, right?
okay.
Yeah.
You're trying to summon forth the maximum creativity and output from people, including the structure of the way they want to structure the conversation. Whatever happens is, you didn't say this, but another way this strikes me is whatever happens is fine.
Yeah.
Whatever happens is what was supposed to happen. Is that what you said?
Yep. That's what it is. That's the only thing that could have happened.
Okay.
So, and so this has been around since the 80s. There was a guy named Harrison Owen who developed this structure, and for us in Chicago, it was popularized by Michael Herman. And there's an open space technology dot. Hold on, make sure I get the right one. So it's called openspaceworld.org. Open space.
Nice.
We'll put the link up. But that's Michael Herman's talk about it. You can check it on Wikipedia. You can see the history of it. But it's been around for a while, and it's used not just for software stuff. It's they use it for rebuilding. They've used it for rebuilding villages in disaster areas. What are the different things we need to do? Which ones are you most interested in taking part in and doing that? When we're running open spaces at conventions, you're not solving a problem per se. You might declare that there's a topic in general that you want to, like if there's a theme to the conference, you might say that, try and keep your conversations in that space. But there's no law that actually says it has to. And that's the thing that when you had said, well, you want to control that they must meet a certain criteria, you don't necessarily know where any conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
So limiting the idea up front is potentially closing the door on a solution that you don't want to.
So you have to have some humility to say, I don't know what the structure of this conversation should be optimally, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah. The point is not for you to say, I have an idea of what I think the answer to this is. So anyone who wants to come and listen to me talk about that, I'm going to be at station A on session 1. You get people who try that,
Like and subscribe.
you get law 2-feeted right out of that conversation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you wouldn't want to do this if you didn't have a big, hairy problem to solve.
Well, like I said, when we're at the convention, we use it. It's like the same thing that happens when we make a call for a lean coffee. It's the topics range all over the board. If something resonates with someone, they'll go and take part in that conversation. So it's just basically a way of populating conversations with people who care about having those conversations. And if any of the topics that were proposed don't spark interest, then they won't be discussed.
The
Right?
other
Because
the other
they'll
question I
never be fit
had
into
was
the schedule.
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The other question I had was like, we do. You're familiar with scaled, different forms of scaled agile, right?
I'm familiar.
I've heard of them. Scaled,
Yeah.
agile, scrum of scrums, discipline agile, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of forums in there, a bunch of meetings. The thought that I had, maybe this is a dumb question, are there any of those meetings that might be better run as an open space? Seems like it might be more of a tool in the toolkit to say if the organization comes across a big, hairy problem, you could do this as an ad hoc meeting, but maybe don't repurpose your Scrum of Scrums as an open space because you do have specific outcomes and agendas you want to run there because those forums exist for a reason or should.
Right. Right.
Well, I mean, the Scrum of Scrums even it's not as a very long event.
Yeah.
So
Right.
So you're not going to get multiple sessions out of that,
Yeah.
supposedly. But if you were to use it for, like I said, refinement, like at the beginning when you're trying to lay out what the major initiatives are and fleshing that stuff out, because then you could even say, all right, we've fleshed out a potential solution here. We've added the details that would go into a user story, right? We've
So maybe for discovery, or like
Yeah.
that meeting that Marty Kagan talks about, where you've got people talking about value and technical feasibility and business viability and usability and the four risks, and like maybe that's a good way to facilitate that
Yeah.
conversation. For
And if you're going
big
to do a
chunk.
program retrospective, you could probably find some value in doing it there as well.
Very good.
The other thing is, if you're doing in a large environment, big room planning, and you come out of the big room 2 or 3 days or 4 days of big room planning, and you come out with a list of risks and impediments. That's your Rome board. And the number one, after everybody votes on this is the highest risk, okay, you could actually open space that too to, all right, let's do something. Let's pick this apart so that we don't allow it to be the big boulder that impedes our progress. So
It's a good idea.
Because once again, those are all problems to be solved, and that's what open space is for.
Yeah.
One more question. I know this is a dumb question. I'm sorry about this. I have to ask it. Can you do it remotely? Does it really sound so
Yes.
bad that you wouldn't even bother?
No, you can. And it's the same problem you have doing big room planning remotely. Is you've got to have the capability of breakout rooms for the different stations and people to be able to freely move between the breakout rooms, which not all of those tools allow you to freely move around the business.
So you'd have to facilitate harder and plan more clearly because you can't just yell across the room and be like, "Hey, everybody, we're going to go over here."
Well, you kind of can. I mean, what you do is you lay out this agenda usually on like a mural or something. You say, this is the conversations we're going to have. We have breakout room A, B, C, D.
Okay.
In room A, round one is going to have this topic is in B, this topic's in C, and you're going to get 20 minutes. We'll set a timer for 20 minutes, go down and do your thing. And then you can go off. And then as long as people can switch rooms, then they're still achieving. So you can run it remotely, and they do global open spaces.
See, it's challenging for the same reasons that the other scaled conversations are challenging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it definitely is doable. It works. It's a well-worn pattern.
I would check the tools that I'm using if I were you, though. There are certain tools that definitely are not very helpful.
Like what?
Microsoft Teams.
Oh,
The breakout specifically?
there are breakouts in Microsoft Teams. I just don't think they're
It's-
they're
Hard to use, though.
less functional than
Yes,
say a
exactly,
Zoom breakout room.
exactly,
Like once you get
exactly.
stuck in one of those things, you cannot get out. It does
Right.
not release you.
You got some of that sweet, sweet Microsoft user experience, everybody. So
Yeah, I was running my online training last week, and it was my first time using Teams to do it, and I had it randomly select attendees, and it stuck me in one of the attendee lists, and I couldn't exit the room. I ran the damn thing.
why
It's
would
a
you
little
pay for the
kludgy.
product?
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't. The person who pays for the product doesn't.
Well, I had two personas in there. I had one who was anyway. There was one that was a sharer of information, and one that was the speaker. And that way, I was able to.
So use your tools
So
widely
my
is what I'm
sheet-
hearing.
Yeah.
One more
So-
question. What would be the triggers? Let's say you're in a situation where open space would be really the best tool to use, but you don't know it. What would you be looking for? Like, what's the trigger in the organization to make you say, maybe we should run an open space here?
Well,
Just any sort of ongoing problem that you just
the
can't.
one thing that's interesting is when we build this open space, it's very similar to when you're doing big room planning. You don't limit the attendees so much, right? You don't say, I'm just going to put the developers in a room. Like when we did that, the managers were in the room, the developers, there were support people, everyone was there. Anyone who had a stake was there because they've all got input. If for no other reason, they're there to cry and say, listen, you can't leave out this consideration, right? When you're having your lofty discussion, what about this reality? And
So is that some clarification you should give to managers if you're the CTO who wants to run open space? To make your managers, your directors clear that like their people can come or not.
there is, in general, there's not an or not. Like anyone with a stake is there. Like for the big hairy project problem, everyone on the project was there.
So from an organizational perspective, you say they will attend, but then once they get there, they're free to do whatever.
They can wander within the bounds of the event,
Yeah.
but if they were to just sit on the sidelines, they'd be really bored,
Okay.
and you don't allow them a distraction, so they get drawn in.
So they are
They'll find the least objectionable topic to follow. So
I think that's
they have-
one of the keys, though. If you're not participating,
Yeah, it's your fault.
then yeah, and
Because-
so what's the point?
Yeah, if you're in the room and it goes through the voting phase and you don't see anything up there, or they go through topic gathering and you don't see anything that piques your interest, why didn't you bring up something that would pique your interest?
Okay.
Well, maybe it didn't get voted on. Maybe you did. It ended up in the marketplace, and nobody else was
maybe
interested.
and that would be the
Sorry.
best outcome. But in general, it's that you had a topic that you didn't bring up. I was just sure somebody else was going to bring it up. It's like, well, next time, next round.
So those are all possible
You propose
scenarios, but the scenario where Larry didn't come because he's got other stuff to work on, that's not a valid, like that's not a thing you would have in open space.
Well, are we going to say that Larry does not have any ideas to contribute to the solution that we're all? I mean, it's kind of an all hands on deck thing.
Got it. Okay. Just thinking about expectations for leadership. When
Otherwise, it's just a brainstorming session of some subset of people, and you're going to get the same substandard outcome.
and it's an important enough problem.
Suboptimal outcome. Sorry, not substandard.
So, yeah, but by definition, it's an important enough problem that it makes sense to dedicate people's time to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't need an open space, right?
Right.
Okay. I think I have no more questions, Your Honor. I learned a lot. Thank you, gentlemen.
It'll come back.
Now I'm
one
sure
day.
this has been this agile thing, and I know I've been happy. I'm positive of that.
I've been Jeff Singleton.
I've been Mike Marchi.
And we will see you next time.